Right. As he was teaching, he said, "Watch out for legal experts. They like to walk around in long robes. They want to be greeted with honor in the markets. They long for places of honor in the synagogues and at banquets. They are the ones who cheat widows out of their homes, and to show off, they say long prayers. They will be judged most harshly." Jesus sat across from the collection box of the temple treasury and observed how the crowd gave their money. Many rich people were throwing in lots of money. One poor widow came forward and put in 2 small copper coins, worth a penny. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I assure you that this poor widow has put in more money than everyone who's been putting money in the treasury. All of them are giving out of their spare change, but she, from her hopeless poverty, has given everything she had, even what she needed to live on."
I do enjoy people watching. Even though I really don't have a chance much anymore, I should probably go to the mall and sit and watch more than I do. And right now I'm not going to parks because I go with Frankie and he doesn't like people, so we have to avoid them. But when we're eating out, I watch who's at the tables next to me and try to figure out relationships. Is that grandfather, grandmother? Is it dad taking out his daughter on the only Saturday they have together? You try to guess the scenarios. And it's the grocery store. There's an older person and a younger person. You're like, are they related, or is that just a nice neighbor taking her older neighbor out because they need help? Or I'll have fun watching 2 older people, neither of which can barely walk, pushing the groceries up and refusing all help because they can do it, by golly. District conference always gives me a chance to people watch, though I must say Verlina was more boring than Southern PA. Because Southern PA has a greater variety of people. There's the ladies who kept wearing their covering and their modest dresses like the Amish. And here there's only a few people that have distinct styles. And you're like, they're from that church because all the women wear that outfit. And to be fair, there is one church that seems to all wear the same outfit. And you're trying to figure out who's who and who's dressed up and who's dressed down. And it's a lot of fun watching them. Well, today in the scriptures, we find Jesus and his disciples people watching. They're watching the people come by, and they're in the court of the temple. Now, the scripture before this is Jesus' encounter with a scribe. And scribes are not always evil. Some of them are good, and some of them are trying to follow Jesus. And this scribe came to Jesus and asked, what can I do? What's the right thing? And he said, well, what's the top commandment? And the scribe said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And Jesus said, and what else? And he said, love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, that's better than all the sacrifices that people might offer. And so here we are at the place where people offer sacrifices. And we know that Jesus was standing with his disciples in the court of the women. So when we say his disciples, at least for this time, we know the women were along. We always view him just walking around with men only, but there were women in that crowd too. And we know that because this is where the offering boxes were. There were 13 offering boxes. They were called the trumpets because they were shaped like an upside down trumpet, and then they fell into a box. And each trumpet had a specific category. Chest 1 and 2 were for the temple tax. Now, chest 1 was for this year's temple tax. Chest 2 was for last year's temple tax, in case you missed. Better than our government, right? Number 1 and number 2. And everyone would put that in. Chest 3 and to 7, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, were for sacrificial expenses, like buying your turtle doves for the babies, or helping them buy wood to buy sacrifices, or for the cost of the incense, or the gold, or the flour for that sacred bread. Maybe we could say they were for building expenses or personnel expenses, if we were breaking it down to our budget. But test 8 was money left over from sin offerings. And I found this kind of interesting. If you had saved $20 to go buy a goat for a sin offering and it only cost 19, you weren't lucky. That money went into the temple treasury. That money went into those other boxes. It didn't go home. It was designated to God, and so you put that in there. Then there was test, and that money was also for personal sins, things that you had committed that you didn't know. So it was personal purification. And we talked last week about there was, sins that you didn't know and then the sins you did know, and you had to take care of both of them. But this one is to purify yourself. And then boxes 9 through 12 were for money left over from guilt offerings or Nazirite pledges or leper pledges. And these were the things that you might have done that you knew were wrong and that you needed forgiveness and maybe had something to do with other people. Now the final chest, number 13, which is fun because we always think that's a bad number, but it wasn't in the Bible here. The priest who had no land to farm, the stranger, and the widow and the orphan were to be taken care of by the temple offerings of this poor box. It was the box for those who had nothing. In the old days, the brethren used to have something in the back called the deacon box, and you would put money in. And so if maybe a fellow person had a really bad crop, the deacons would get together and say, okay, let's look what we have in the deacon box, and we'll give that to them. And I have been in deacon meetings where we've had people come privately and say, I can't pay my electric bill. And we're like, oh, we have a deacon fund, And that's what this was like, the box for the poor people. Now, Jesus is watching all these people. And he's seeing the wealthy people, and he's seeing those that he knows. Devour. They don't just take away, they gobble up and they devour widows' houses. Now, interestingly, he uses the same Greek word for devour as Jesus used when he talked about the seed that was devoured by the birds because it was on hard ground. It's a devouring, it's a taking of what you're not supposed to have. It's a hard ground indeed. But widows still get their houses gobbled up. We think that was something that happened back then. We had a very nice name named Dorothy who used to start coming to our church because she very much loved the peace position. So she was very excited to find a church that was into peace. And her house was really nice, and she dressed very well. And it wasn't until she'd been with us a few years we found out that she struggled a lot financially. You see, her husband had had a very good job with a company that he was at for a long time, maybe 25 years. And when he retired, he left her a very nice pension. But that company got sold to another company, which decided not to carry the pension funds with them, and so now she was left with Social Security. You see, her house had been gobbled up. She could still afford to live where she lived only because it was already purchased. And we do the same thing. We sometimes take from others that which they need for survival. It's also interesting that Mark hardly ever mentions the word poor. Fact is, the first time Mark uses the word poor is in relationship to the rich young ruler. And what happens there? He comes to Jesus and he says, what can I have for eternal life? And Jesus says, give all that you have to the poor, right? And what has this widow just done? She's given all that she has to the poor. She's giving it all away. She didn't have much, but she gave it all away. And I find it very hard at times to imagine what it's like to have hardly any and to give it away. I know it's happened to me. I remember one day, one of our neighbors came up to me and said, Marla, I need $20. I said, I only have $120. That's okay, I'll take it. And I didn't know what to say because, I couldn't break it down to here have 5. That was all I had. And she definitely was not taking a no. But I'm thinking that maybe she had just had a good meal. Maybe she had, for the first time, been able to do something. And she's thinking, you know what? Maybe someone else would like a little of that blessing. I just found out that God will take care of me. And maybe I can give that away freely so that other people can be taken care of. I may have told you the story of Mono, who was my sister Doreen's house help in Zambia. When I was visiting my sister in Zambia, Mono invited us to her house for a meal. And so we went over to her house. It was a simple house, and we had chicken and rice. And of course, we all enjoyed the meal very much. And it wasn't until I was back home that my sister wrote and said, I just found out that Mona owned 3 chickens and she fed us one of them. And I wondered then if I had been able to eat that chicken if I had known it was one of 3, which meant her eggs also went down, right? And she had 1 child to take care of. But that was the kind of sacrifice we often see the poor people giving that rich people don't, because they know what it's like to hand it on. Or an American example, we had a lady at Eastwood who lived in a very poor house, had a really lousy life. Her husband was a drunk who would take the money and use it, and she tried to get whatever she could before he'd take it, and he would beat her up and his son up, and was not a great life. And yet, I was told later, we had one couple that had been attending the church, and then they both had degrees in music, and they left Akron and moved to Indiana to get their master's degree. And they came to me one time after they'd been home, and they said they'd visited for the weekend and played and sang for us. And she came to me and she says, Marla? I said, what? She said, this woman, Sally, every time we visit, she hands us money for gas money. I mean, of the people in the church who had the least to share, I would have put Sally on the list. And yet, because she knew what it was like to have little, she knew that they might not have gas money. You see, because it's the poor that understand what poverty is like. And so when we see this woman, and I don't know why we think of a widow as old. Maybe she was in her 20s and had lost her husband, got married at 13 or 17, and who killed 2 children at home. She had needs too, but she wanted to give them away. Sometimes we want the big givers. We still have this thing that if you're wealthy, you're good. And in the Bible, it was a thing of honor to have enough money to give away. If you were wealthy, you could give away. So the Roman circuses, for example, were all about honor. I have enough money that I can invite you all to this banquet and I can feed all of you people because I have spare. It was an honor thing. When Jesus fed the 5,000, he was being honored because he could feed so many people. So when these wealthy people are coming in and saying, I can put in these spare bags of cash, which makes you wonder which one they put their money in. 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2, 3 through whatever. Was it guilt? Was it sin? Whatever. That they put that money in, but they put it in such a way that it's noticeable. It wasn't hidden. Now, we've been trained in the church to keep it hidden, but in many churches, that's not the way. I've often seen people give, and it's very obvious. Most churches think that we kind of want the big givers, and we kind of think that maybe it's the big givers that keep us running. But the truth is, Samuel Cruz wrote, most of the I hope I say this word right, most of the charity in our country is given by middle class and working class, not by the wealthy. And if you look usually at the giving of the wealthy and the percentage, it is not up to 10% or 15% like other people give. Our amount of giving matters. And sometimes we think, what do my mites matter? We wonder if we make a difference, which is what was emphasized in the sermon today. Henry Langnack wrote, think of what common roots our meditations take when we contemplate the story of the widow's offering. Mine goes something like this. What's the point of all my small acts of faithfulness? Why even bother? Even if I would liquidate all my assets and give them to the poor, I might have enough for one small soup kitchen to feed 100 people. I thought of that, we sell it all and have giveaway. But if I don't liquidate my assets, then am I showing that I have no trust in God's provision? And then he goes on and said, and this is, I think, a question I asked myself. I sit in the food court in the mall and watch as bag after bag of trash containing aluminum cans and plastic bottles are loaded up and taken to the landfills. And by the way, that fill, usually it's got food in it too, right? I mean, I don't go to the mall. I don't like seeing what's thrown away. And I know that this scene is repeated daily in thousands of venues around the world. And he says, why do I bother recycling my 2 6-packs per week of Diet Cola? What is the meaning of my measly individual action? How can the faithfulness of the widow be sustained in me? My children and grandchildren say, no, Nana, no, don't pick up trash. But I figure if each of us picked up 2 pieces, it would make a big difference. Or just, does it matter that only sometimes we get to recycle stuff and that we're not perfect? But I think the Widow's Mite tells us a story that every little bit matters. I couldn't find a recording of Andy Murray's "What Can One Person Do" is a very good question if you don't do nothing at all. Because we need to remember it's the lots of us doing one thing, one little thing, and one little thing that changes the world. At least what we do makes a difference. As a congregation, we do a lot with our giving. We're not big. Our denomination is not big, and yet we do a lot with our giving too. At district conference, we heard that the Brethren Disaster Relief is known as the group that comes in when everyone else has walked away. In other words, the others are there when the cameras are there and they're doing the cleanup, but then all the cleanup is done and all the excitement, and then here are all these houses to be rebuilt. And there we are, months, years later, still rebuilding them. No fame, no glory, just getting it done. We may not be big and powerful as individuals, as a church, as a denomination, but hopefully our gifts come from an honest place. As we have been given, we're blessed to give others. And we want to give others, not just money, but things of joy too. It's often we don't think about the things that continue to happen, how the rich continue to have more. In the US, for example, I was checking it out. In 2023, the average CEO earned 290 times what the average worker does. In 1965, they earned 21 times what the average worker does. So when Jesus was saying they gobble up, it's still happening. And that leaves us with us feeling like, what can I do? But the answer is we could be like that widow. We can give what we have. Although our society continues to honor and praise the rich, if you interview kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? Rich. Right? Powerful. We know that it's in the small and the unknown things that Jesus pays attention. It is in our provision that God takes care of us and we can trust. And I know there's been times in your life, because there have been in mine, where I'm like, oh, I don't think I should give anything away because I need it all. And God always says there's someone who needs it more than you, and you need to remember them. And that, for me, is the story of the widow's mite. This person who said, I've been taken care of in the most important ways, and I'm going to share. And I see her dancing with joy to give away that little bit. Somebody said we usually see her kind of slinking in because she's embarrassed of her offering. I don't think so. I think she was happy that she had something to give. And I hope that's the joy we find when God asks us for time or for money or for people to love. Let us sing together.